I'm gonna start my speech in 3, 2, 1. This House would adopt student loan mechanism in Indonesia. Opposition a policy where the state shifts the financial burden of higher education onto individual students through an income contingent loan. This mechanism forces graduates to pay back their tuition fees once they reach a certain income level under a strict domestic work ban. Indonesia doesn't need a student loan system. As a wealthy country with vast resources, the government's absolute priority must be creating new jobs to reset the economy in providing free education, rather than trapping low and middle income families into a lifelong debt cycle at a time when finding a decent job is already extremely difficult. What the proposition argues that students' loans are sustainable because the money falls back to the government step by step. They claim that giving free education will bankrupt the state budget and leave universities without any funding to survive. This logic is completely flawed because it treats education as a commercial business instead of a fundamental human right. Indonesia is a sovereign, wealthy nation blessed with rich natural resources. The state will never go bankrupt by freeing tuition costs if our state budget and natural wealth are managed properly for the welfare of the people. Forcing students to borrow money proves that the government is avoiding its constitutional duty. Education is an investment in human capital, not a tool for the state to generate a financial return on investment. The proposition claims that paying after graduation under Singapore model is safe because it uses an income contingent repayment plan. They argue it doesn't burden families during economic crisis and keeps talent inside the country through a domestic work ban. The proposition is making a classic faulty analogy because they choose to ignore the massive structural differences between the two nations. Singapore is highly developed financial hub with a high income market and an abundant supply of formal high paying jobs in stark contrast. Indonesia's job market is deeply competitive, high, unstable, and dominated by low-paying or informal work. When Indonesian graduates enter the workforce, their entry-level salary is incredibly small. If this tiny income is cut further to pay back college debt, graduates will have absolutely nothing left to fulfill their basic needs, survive daily life, or help their families out of financial crisis. The proposition admits that copying the United States model is a total failure that traps millions of people in lifelong debt, which is why they try to distance themselves from it and propose the Singapore model instead. The proposition's argument falls into a massive self-contradiction. The United States is a global economic superpower with a highly mature financial system, advanced banking regulations, and strong job markets. If a superpower rich as the United States completely failed to manage students' debt and ended up ruining the financial future of its youth, Indonesia faces an even more dangerous risk. The root solution to rotate the economy is not collecting debt from poor and middle class graduates. The real situation is for the state to create jobs. Creating jobs allow graduates to earn a proper living, increases public spending power, and generates state taxes naturally without creating a toxic debt trap for the younger generation. Unlike poor or developing nations, that genuinely struggle to fund basic public services. Indonesia's budget capacity is robust, proven by its large national education fund and high revenues from natural resources like mining and domestic industrialization. When we compare the two sides, the proportions when wants to fund universities by taking money directly out of students' pockets through future debt. On our side, we prove that using the state revenues from our natural wealth is more than enough to fully fund universities' operation and offer free tuition directly to lower and middle class students without needing any commercial loan schemes. There's a massive, undeniable contrast between the employment realities of these two countries. Singapore's economy is highly efficient. Their fresh graduates receive high standard salaries that easily cover both high living costs and any minor education debt. In contrast, the real condition in Indonesia shows a high structural gaps. Formal jobs are extremely scarce, and unemployment among university graduates remains high. Most fresh graduates in Indonesia only receive low minimum wages, that are barely enough to pay for basic necessities like rent, transport, and daily food. In this real-world scenario, there is zero financial room left to pay back college loans without forcing these graduates into extreme poverty. The failure of the United States, which the proposition themselves brought up, is contrary empirical proof that turning higher education into a loan system is fundamentally broken. If a global superpower with an incredibly strong economy cannot protect its citizens from the horror of lifelong student debt, Indonesia, as a developing nation with a weaker financial safety net, is guaranteed to face a much worse economic disaster. This comparison proves that students' loans are inherently toxic. The system doesn't change just because you call it a Singapore model. The root danger of debt remains exactly the same. Therefore, because student loans are based on a toxic capitalistic mindset, completely ignore the harsh reality of low wages and scarce jobs in Indonesia, and carry the exact same systemic risk that caused the economic crisis in the United States. The proposition is dangerous plan to adopt a student loan mechanism must be completely proudly rejected. Thank you.